I always knew that I was going to be sharing my story with you guys. But the truth is I've been avoiding it a little bit. I've been avoiding it because I always thought, and I don't think this anymore, but I always thought, why does anyone want to hear my story? But what I have found is the more I share my story, and I hope this encourages you because I know you have a story too, the more people can heal, the more people can learn and grow, and also the more you heal, the more you grow, the more you change, and over time, you start to find even more discoveries within your own story. So here we go, part 1 of I don't even know how many we're gonna do. Part 1. So I had an incredible childhood. I had an incredible childhood filled with friends, filled with a loving family. My brother, we would play fight in the house with my parents. We would have snowball fights going through the house. We had movies and laughter and dinner together and activities and biking. It was beautiful. All the friends wanted to come over to our house and hang out. We never went without. But the funny thing is that what I didn't know, and of course, how would you when you're young and you're a child, is that we grew up in a neighborhood. We grew up in a neighborhood for low-income families. And for me, living in that neighborhood was filled with so many memories. I made some of my greatest friends from that neighborhood and friends that are still in my life today. However, when I was about 16 years old, everything changed. We did move out of the neighborhood when I was about 15, but at 16, it was like life as I knew it was no longer. We had gone through 6 close family members passing away in the span of 5 years, and these were close family members, aunts, uncles, grandparents. It was heavy. At the same time, when my grandmother passed away, my boyfriend, my first love, broke up with me, and that was absolutely devastating. I think that was the first time that I really started to have insecurities about myself and felt unlovable. In addition to that, I recognized, oh my gosh, my dad has addictive challenges. He is alcoholic. He has alcohol problems. At the same time as that happened, I also noticed suddenly my family was having financial challenges. So much happened in a short period of time. It was really hard to understand as a young teenager what was going on. And what I know now today is I had lived such a very sheltered life that when everything went wrong, I didn't know how to handle life. I had not been given the tools to understand how to move through challenges because I had been so privileged before. When everything happened, all the deaths in my family, I always say it felt like my mom died at the same time because she was filled with so much melancholy, so much pain within herself, and deep depression, losing so many of her family members, that it was hard for her to show up in the ways that she wanted to. And I, becoming so aware of my dad's alcohol challenges, was internalizing a lot of the pain that was going on, and I started developing stomach aches. Going through my breakup, seeing all the deaths in the family, it was like every time you were mourning one, another one would happen. I would stay up late at night holding my stomach in so much pain. And this is when I saw a lot that I didn't necessarily want to see. This is when I noticed my dad had drinking issues because he would stay up later than everybody and would drink. And I want to be very clear when I share this because it's not my story to share, and I don't want to dive into too much of the details of my father, but you know, when someone is drinking to an excess or utilizing any other type of substance, it's because they too are hurting inside. At that time, I wasn't able to see it. Instead, I just saw, oh my gosh, what is happening? How did I miss this? But then as I thought about it, I remembered I played waitress my whole life. My dad never went without a beer. It was a shock to my system. So when all the family members had passed away and I was staying up late at night with stomach aches and my mom was feeling depressed and I noticed my dad was alcoholic, it was really challenging. I think it contributed to the factors of my stomach aches, but of course I didn't consciously know this and was grieving this breakup that, of course, I thought I was going to marry my first love, thought he was my forever. I also got into another relationship, which, if you've watched videos, the person I am no longer with, the person I married, is the relationship I got into as I was mourning my previous first love. I hope that's not too complicated to understand. Basically, I fell in love with somebody in high school. We didn't work out. He broke up with me the day my grandmother died, and then I met my current, now past, partner. So when he came into my life, I was still grieving and mourning my relationship with my first love. It was a really messy time, and now I was sort of living a lie. Like, I definitely had feelings for my partner, but my parents had moved him into our home. Now it was like, oh my gosh, my bedroom is transforming. I have this boyfriend moving into my house, and I'm only 16 years old, 17 years old. I'm going through all this grief and this loss. I'm trying to move through what I'm seeing of my mom and her depression, trying to support my brother, watching my father have alcohol challenges, and there's financial issues. And my family was asking to borrow money, and it was so strange to me because we had always had money and we had never gone without. It was a real shock to the system, and as you can imagine, at that age, you think you know everything. 16, 17, I mean, I certainly did, but you don't. So what was happening is I would be crunched over and my stomach would be bloating and I would be in pain and I'd be rocking myself back and forth, not understanding why my stomach was hurting so bad. I was going to the washroom uncontrollably, and I'll be the first to tell you guys, you know, it used to be super embarrassing for me to say, but it would be happening uncontrollably in my pants. I would call my mom from work, from school, and I'd be like, Mom, come pick me up. I don't know what's happening. We now know what I was experiencing was IBS, but back then, irritable bowel syndrome was not something commonly spoken about or commonly shared, and I'll make sure in the video link, in case you are not aware of what IBS is, that there's a short description there for you to know what that is in case you have similar experiences. But I was having stomach pains and uncontrollable washroom challenges, maybe going too much, not going enough, and not having control over what was happening in my system. And I would go to the hospital and I would say, something's wrong with me, my stomach hurts, and everything was inconclusive. No matter what tests they did, no matter what was happening, they couldn't find what was going on. In fact, back then, not knowing what IBS was, they would say it's all in your head. I guess they weren't wrong because IBS is primarily created through stress. You just felt like you were crazy. You felt like you were crazy and you were making this up. And so I went to my family physician, and my family physician said, SabriNa, you need to play the elimination diet. I think you're allergic to something, and this is why your stomach hurts. This is why you're getting all these gurgly feelings. This is why you're in pain and you're having uncontrollable washroom issues. And so I started to eliminate everything, you guys. I became very fearful of food. This is where I did not know the journey I was about to embark on would be a 17-year journey of recovery, health, getting to know oneself. The reason I started this podcast series with you by speaking to you about where I'm at in my life currently with my relationship and that my marriage ended is because this entire story, this part one, leads into everything and where I am today. I had no idea it would be a 17-year journey. when the doctor told me that he thought I had allergies to play the elimination diet, I started looking at all the food I was eating. And I became very, very fearful of what I was ingesting, because was it that was hurting my stomach? Was it this that was hurting my stomach? And the partner that I was dating, the new partner that I was dating, was a year older than me. He was going clubbing, he was going dancing, and I wanted to do the same. I wanted to look good. I didn't want my stomach to be bloated. I didn't want my stomach to hurt. I wanted to look good. It was an age where you are moving into womanhood. You are moving into your hormones, and your body is developing more as a woman. I didn't want to feel this way and certainly be embarrassed. Suddenly, I didn't want to go to restaurants. I began to lie about the food that I was eating. I'd say I ate and I didn't. I didn't even realize how fearful I was at the food that I was ingesting, because I was so deep within the thoughts about what it could possibly do to me, that eventually I lost a scary amount of weight. I lost so much weight that we were going to the hospital, and I was thinking that I was dying. I didn't know what was wrong with me. Here's where I'm going to say trigger warning, because I will share the amount of weight that I lost. And if you have gone through an eating disorder, or you have OCD or any other mental health challenges, this would be a really good time to shut this off. Or if you have children in the room and you don't want them to hear this, this would be a really good time. At 19 years old, I went from 115 pounds to 69 pounds. I am lucky to be alive. And that's why at the beginning of these podcasts, I say my greatest accomplishment in this life is being alive. Because thank you, body, for taking care of me and keeping me functioning when all my organs could have shut down and gave out on me. This many years later, I am still so grateful to be alive. When you get down to that low amount of weight, your body is in full on starvation mode. My body was considered anorexic. And I'd go to the hospital and they'd say, well, it looks like she's in an eating disorder phase of her life. And my mom would fight and say, no, she's not. She doesn't have an eating disorder. She's never had body image issues. She's never had any challenges with her body. I was active. I would play football, not professionally, just for fun. I was in the drama club and acting, and I was in jiu-jitsu. I was 2 belts away from black. Everything had to stop because I became so unwell and so fearful to eat food, in fear that I would have these adverse effects, going to the bathroom uncontrollably, these pains in my stomach, how my body would look, and it would bloat up in pain. The fear overrid any sort of logical reason to nourish my body. This is where eventually I learned that OCD was the driven factor behind my lack of nourishment. This is where I say to you that I have an OCD diagnosis. So when OCD is untreated, which mine had gone untreated for 10 years before I got a true diagnosis, I thought it was an eating disorder. But every time I would go to the hospital and even try and enroll in the eating disorder clinic, they wouldn't take me. I didn't fit the criteria, not from the way my body looked. My body fit the criteria for help with an eating disorder, but my mind didn't. Back then, there was very clear, questions that you'd be asked to see if you can get into a program, and I didn't fit. I know that has since changed, and I'm so grateful for the evolution of mental health and the way we talk about it today and the ways we didn't before, how eating disorders and OCD really do work in tandem, and how there's so much more support when it comes to recovery now versus then. But back then, I couldn't get help, so I felt like a floater. I didn't know what was going on. And because my mind had gone into complete starvation mode, when your mind goes into starvation mode, you do develop eating disorder-like traits. And there's an incredible study that I'm going to make sure that I put in the show notes. It's the Minnesota Starvation diet experiment, where it speaks to soldiers that came back from the war, and they starved the soldiers to see the types of behaviors that would show up. And the behaviors that showed up in these soldiers that had perfectly healthy bodies, never had body dysmorphia, really developed traits the same that you see in those struggling with eating disorders today. The same traits that I had experienced. So this is part one of my story and how I fell into an eating disorder. And I'm going to share in part two what it looked like and what it felt like while I was in that eating disorder and what I had moved through. Because if there's someone out there who has an eating disorder, who's going through disordered eating, my hope is that we can connect, or that you can connect to my story and find hope that you can recover, that you can get better, that you can take your power back, and that I will be able to provide tools that allow you to move ahead in your journey. But the takeaway today, the biggest takeaway from this video and why I've created this and why I want to share with you, is because there are some true factors that needed to be looked at here. I do not blame my family doctor, because remember, we take 100% responsibility for how we show up in life and how we manage the challenges that we do. But he should have asked, could have asked, what is going on in your life? I think if my doctor would have asked me what was going on in my life, and I would have been able to express stress, trauma, grief, loss, addiction, depression, breakups, we could have linked my stomach aches to all the trauma that I was going through, and perhaps seeking out a therapist would have been a better solution than playing the elimination diet. We would have been able to figure that out, and I maybe wouldn't have lost weight. So step one is, if you're experiencing any sort of body sensations, somatic feelings, and I think our society looks at this on such a deeper lens now, which is why when I work with my clients, it really is mind, body, spirit. I'm so happy that we're speaking about the connection to the body and stress versus how we did before. It is a game changer. So always look at your stress levels and what you are moving through before assuming that there's something detrimental going on with your body. Number two, if you are having to do an elimination diet, one of the things that I should have done, could have done, didn't do, was seek out a professional. Had I worked with a nutritionist or a dietitian at the time, he would have been able to walk me through the right steps to eliminate foods from my diet and still keep me eating healthy, and maybe would have noticed the irrational fears popping up, which could have led to an OCD diagnosis well before 10 years. So having that professional guide you as you move through what you are going through is key. This is why I studied holistic nutrition. You can imagine the passion I have behind knowing and understanding the body and how to nourish it when we are moving through stress and trauma after experiencing something like I did. I would say don't get into another relationship until you're done mourning the current relationship you have, because I think I added to the stress that I was moving through. Though I had fallen for this new partner in my life, I was still grieving my old partner, thus living a lie as already moving through so much trauma and grief and wasn't necessarily ready for. And I guess the last thing I would say is that we don't always understand the journeys we move through and the challenges, and I'm saying this to somebody who's watching this who maybe needs this spark of hope right now. If you are heavy involved in some sort of trauma and some sort of grief, or you're moving through your own diagnosis, what lays ahead of you is going to be so much greater than what you are currently going through, so long as you can start to tap into your truth and trust the process. Because if you would have asked me while I was in the thick of everything that I was going through, I would have never seen the light at the end of the tunnel. But there is so much growth on the other side. There's so much beauty in the journey. If I had known what the next 17 years of my life was going to look like when I was moving through this, I wouldn't have believed you. But through all of this, there's nothing that I would have changed, and I would do it all over again if it meant that I was going to be the person I am today.